Welcome back to Green and Gold Forever for the first edition of this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed what we've had so far. We have a little bit more left to go before we wrap up today. If you want to comment on anything you heard in the first part of the show, you can reach us at greenandgoldpodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at greengold4, the number 4, ever. That's our Twitter handle. You can talk to us there as well. We'd love to hear what you have to say, even if it's about the rant room, where everything's supposed to stay in the rant room. But if you decide to drag it out, I guess we'll let you do it just this once. But anyways, let's get back to the issues at hand, and let's talk briefly about the rest of the league. Some NFL offseason items that were very interesting. Kind of quieter compared to last year. You're not hearing about stuff nonstop about whether or not they're even going to have games. So it's nice to know that we're actually going to play football in 2012. But there's also certainly some big stories, maybe some of the biggest we've seen other than the lockout in the last 10 years. Let's begin with one of the bigger ones, which is the Saints bounty program. Greg Williams, supposedly the one responsible. Sean Payton turned a blind eye to it. The 4 guys that I heard cited that were targeted were Kurt Warner, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and Cam Newton. If you remember back to 2009, Kurt Warner was actually injured in that game, as was Brett Favre, but he finished. Of course, Brett Favre would finish. I know we're kind of disagree on this a little bit, and we'll touch that briefly right here. I know you're still kind of a little bitter about Favre. I still am somewhat bitter, but I feel like I'm forgiving him a little faster than the folks I normally converse about Packers with. Did that change at all, your perception of Brett Favre as a Viking, knowing that the Saints were trying to injure him, did injure him, and he still finished the game?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it did. I gained a little bit of respect back for him, I guess, when I mean, watching the game, you could obviously tell that was the purpose. Mm-hmm. So I guess I don't really know why this changed my perspective on it, but I guess he just kind of got a little bit of that toughness back that we'd seen throughout the years in Green Bay, and I guess I did gain a little bit of respect back for him with hearing those reports that he was targeted for injuries. So.
Yeah, I agree. The first thing I thought of when I heard about the bounty program was that hit on the ankle. That seemed incredibly low, that for whatever reason wasn't flagged. I don't know, my feeling on Favre, especially after that, it kind of amplified it, but I would say my feeling on Favre, he's kind of like a disgraced family member or a friend you haven't talked to in a while, and he's done a lot of rotten things. And as a Packer fan, you kind of feel like, at least I do, for a while you're kind of like, you see him sleeping out on the park bench, and you're like, dude, just sleep on the couch here. I mean, we don't have to be best buds yet, but I don't want you out there. Come on in here. I'll get you a glass of milk.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I kind of, right now, it's like when I think about Brett Favre, I almost chuckle. Like, that's his legacy with me right now, which is, like, maybe is unfair considering he won the Super Bowl here and he did so many great things, but it's just with all the things that have happened, he's just almost like a running joke at this point.
Yeah, he is. I mean, it's horrible, but it is.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I think the longer he's retired, the more that'll kind of go away, and because everybody right now is, when somebody's like thinking about retirement, Brett Favre always comes up. It's like, I'm not going to pull a Brett Favre. It's just he's kind of a joke right now, and I think that'll change throughout down the future. I think it'll change for me too. By the time he's inducted into the Hall of Fame, I'm sure I'll probably have gotten over most of that stuff, but I'm still not completely there yet.
Well, we'll give you all the time you need. I know it was a very devastating breakup for us here in Packer Nation, so okay, let's talk about some of the, I guess we didn't really talk about the Saints bounty at all there. We got sidetracked by Brett Favre. That's what he does. That's what he's all about. So let's go back to the New Orleans Saints. What were your first reactions when you heard about this story?
I guess initially it didn't really spark too much in me. I guess I kind of figured that this was sort of going on throughout the league. I mean, it was obvious to anybody who watched that NFC Championship game that they were trying to hurt Brett Favre, and maybe even Kurt Warner in the week before in the playoffs as well. But I guess the part that irritated me the most is just like the arrogance that Sean Payton and the Saints showed. I think if it was only this bounty program for injuring players, I bet he probably would have only gotten suspended, somewhere between 4 to 8 games. But for continuously just ignoring Roger Goodell, calling and saying, hey, we know you're doing this, you have to stop. And to keep doing it, and for Greg Williams to have that just despicable pregame speech or whatever you would call that before the 49ers.
Yeah, that was awful. I don't know if General Patton used that kind of language talking about, but yeah, I don't know. I felt kind of the same way you did. I was really, to tell you the truth, if somebody would have said there's a bounty program in the NFL, who's behind it, my first guess would have been Greg Williams. I guess I wasn't surprised that it was him. I think part of the thing that bothered me about it is kind of the faux outrage a little bit, because so many columns, and especially guys at the worldwide leader in sports that I watch from time to time, I would say that you see so much stuff about people being upset about how the game is not as tough as it was, and how these guys are just playing flag football out there, and then all of a sudden, you got guys like Rodney Harrison and some of the guys on First Take just saying, well, you got to pop a guy in the mouth if you have to, and then all of a sudden they come out with a bounty program, and some of them have said, some of them were upset about it, and other ones were kind of along the lines of, like you didn't know this was happening, give me a break. So I think I kind of believe or side with the latter folks a little bit more.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. There's it seems like everything's changed so much in 2 years, because I guess I didn't even really realize until I read something that Jacked Up segment that ESPN used to run isn't on the air anymore.
Oh wow.
And I'm sure that's mostly I'm sure that's mostly because of like these kind of things and the concussion problems that they've been having and the lawsuits, and the NFL saying we should probably stop this stuff now.
Sure.
With all these reports and lawsuits coming and everything. But yeah, I agree. I think like certain networks and everything, like the analysts probably two or 3 months ago were talking about how the game is getting soft and they don't like it. I know Gruden always kind of talks like that in the booth. Back in my day kind of stuff. And and everybody all of a sudden seems completely be changing their tune now that all this kind of stuff is coming out.
Yeah. Well, I got a Gruden sounder for you if you want to hear it.
Oh, yeah, give it to me.
I stopped at Sue Ann's Bagels. It was the only place that I ever ate at. Andy and I would go to Sue Ann's Bagels and get a dozen bagels.
So there you go.
I think that's my favorite Gruden quote of all time. I'm sure most people don't know what that was, but...
That was from the Holmgren special from a long time ago. Found it on a broken VHS tape a couple months ago in one of my closets. But, yeah, I think... So I think they got the appropriate penalty. I think a lot of people were real upset about that. I would be absolutely shocked if you ever saw Greg Williams in the NFL again. I think Sean Payton, some people think he shouldn't have got that much. To me, he's the guy in charge. I mean, if he wants all the credit for being an offensive genius and this guy who saved the Saints, well, go take your year off because you're obviously the one in charge there.
And they've showed in the reports that it was the cover-up, and he was the one in charge of saying, guys, hey, we got to get our story straight here. He knew what was going on, and as a head coach, he's got to be the one to put a stop to it.
Yeah.
I heard go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say I heard Mike Greenberg talking on the radio kind of when this came out on the Mike and Mike show, and he was talking about how the penalty was way too harsh and how this was similar to the SMU death penalty, and I couldn't disagree with that more. I mean, your coach sits out a year, but I mean, you still have all the same players. It's not like college where you're recruiting. This isn't going to be the death of the Saints. I mean, if they're able to re-sign Drew Brees, they still have one of the most talented teams in the NFL. I think the penalty fits, and I don't think it was too much. I think it was great by Roger Goodell. He's putting a stop to this now. We're never going to see another pay-for-injury plan, at least in, I'd say, like the next decade in the NFL. So I completely agree with the penalty that they received.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. That's kind of their emphasis now in the NFL, and I think rightfully so. You played football. I didn't play football. I've certainly been a fan as long as you have. Some of the stuff where people are saying that they condone the huge hits and they condone the helmet-to-helmet stuff and that the bounty program, it happens everywhere, why are you punishing a guy? All that stuff in the NFL, as hard as it was to watch the worst defense of all time and the worst passing defense in history, that's certainly better than watching guys get hurt.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I guess the other big story that we'll talk about is probably the things we just said about Brett Favre is the way that maybe some people, it's a little different, but maybe some people in Indianapolis are feeling about Peyton Manning right now as a Denver Bronco. One of those guys that I never thought I would see leave the city he made famous. Peyton Manning is definitely one of those guys. So that seems to be maybe a disturbing trend for those folks who love the John Elways and Dan Marinos of the world, seeing all these guys that don't get to finish where they started. So what is your reaction about the whole Peyton Manning situation?
Yeah, I with what you just touched on at the end there about, that era of quarterbacks living out their whole careers in one spot, I really think that's probably come to an end. It's with so much media coverage nowadays, and as soon as the quarterback starts tailing off even a little bit, it's going to start being covered like crazy, and that's going to make the fans start, calling for something different. I mean, that was a little different in this case with Peyton Manning, but with his injury and obviously Andrew Luck being on the board, so I think that they made the right choice. I just think it's going to be pretty rough for Andrew Luck now, considering they got rid of a lot of the talent that they had. They lost Saturday, and they lost a few other players. They don't have much left there. He's coming into a really bad situation in Indianapolis.
I kind of feel they did the right thing from a business standpoint. If I was an Indy fan, I'd be pretty bummed out right now. It's different from the Favre situation where Peyton didn't retire. He got injured, and he didn't get injured in a game, I think, which probably is even harder for closure for Indianapolis Colts fans. I think, like you said, Andrew Luck's going to have a rough go of it at first. I think he's probably the closest thing as far as from a maturity standpoint and a skill set standpoint that's been in the draft that's like Peyton Manning since Peyton Manning, I would say. So if there's anybody that can handle being in that kind of situation, I think he's the guy to do it. So I think you almost have to take the chance on him. I would agree. I think it's a good fit for Denver. It's going to be interesting to see what they've done because they're really going to have to throw out their entire offense that got them to the playoffs last year to work around Peyton Manning now that Tim Tebow is a New York Jet.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's going to be too much of a problem with the transition for Denver. I mean, they were playing a spread offense before Tebow started, and I don't know if you heard, but Demaryius Thomas just released it. I don't know if it was a tweet or just a statement a couple days ago.
I think it was a statement with the press.
Yeah, where he was saying that he was glad that Tebow time was over and that he was hogging all the headlines, and he even said that, he made a lot of great plays at the end of games, like you saw with Demaryius at the end of the Pittsburgh game. The whole rest of the games were just terrible.
Well, yeah, that is good that he got out of town. I've seen so many sports centers lead with a Demaryius Thomas story since Tebow got out of Denver, so, it did really clear out the headlines for guys like him. Sarcasm, by the way.
It's going to be it's going to be nice for us now, for us who like to watch those kind of sports shows, that we don't have to hear about it hopefully too much now that he's primarily a backup. I'm sure they'll still find ways to talk about him, but it's going to at least be toned down a little bit for now that he's not making, game-winning plays week after week.
Yeah, well, that's not entirely true, but in my rational moments, I never wish misfortune on anyone. But I certainly was glad to see Tebow Mania and Linsanity taper off a little bit because I don't think I watched ESPN for about 6 months because of it.
And I know we were a little different with the Tebow thing. I was actually kind of turned into a huge Tebow fan last season, but the coverage still made me sick. It was way over the top. So I loved watching Tebow play. I thought it was different than we're used to seeing. And I remember telling you one time that if I want to watch a bad quarterback play, I can watch about 15 different teams in the NFL. And
yeah.
I appreciated that they weren't trying to make him throw the ball and that they were trying to work around his talents and it was just, kind of exciting to watch kind of a read option sort of offense in the NFL, which we've never really seen in our lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. It certainly was different, and I'm kind of surprised that nobody wanted to take a chance on him. And I don't know what it really does for his career to be a New York Jet. But I kind of grew on him a little bit. I hated the coverage. I think that's what bothered me is that people were arguing that Tim Tebow was a top 10 quarterback, and his skill set really at that point in his career and at this point in his career don't really reflect that. Neither does his resume. But I was cheering for Denver against Pittsburgh, I'll tell you that much. The guy won me over on that. I just didn't want to hear about him till next Wednesday.
Yeah.